Let me invite Krista Tippett to please join us and help us sort through and find answers to these profound questions.
Thank you, Rabbi Jacobs. As you have said, this is so rich, and we're just wading in. We are, time is not our friend here. And so I think we're just kind of taking in this richness. And I just want to submit a few questions that have come up from the people who are with us here by this miracle of Zoom. One is about what are the blockages to communication between the richness of the scientific insights and learning about forgiveness and all of this ecosystem of practice and vocabulary and wisdom that comes from our different traditions. I wonder if there are thoughts about that. Is there a robust conversation that the rest of us don't know about?
So not a rhetorical question, an actual question. So please, any of our panelists would like to posit an answer, please.
Yeah, I'm interested if anybody in this group has experienced value and a kind of conversation between the scientific insights and these religious, theological, and spiritual insights. And let me just, because our time is short, let me just give you another one. Also very resonant in our world now. The question is, do we not need to include conversations about restitution and reparation, even as we speak about forgiveness?
So if I may, I think, first of all, this is the beginning of one of those, what we hope will be a long series of very deep conversations between the scientific community and the multi-religious community about forgiveness. This is but the beginning of a journey, so to speak, Krista. In terms of your other very profound question, which I noticed was also shared by one of the listeners, one of the things to highlight here is we are not only speaking about one person forgiving in the midst of darkness. We're speaking about each of us embracing and serving this forgiveness. Now, imagine a world in which each of us is doing that. I believe that the aspect of restitution, of justice, becomes part of that process where each of us is in that journey of forgiveness, is in that moment extended of forgiveness. So it isn't an either or, it is a can we, as we forgive, also address one another's pain and see how it is that we can be healed together through forgiveness. It isn't that forgiveness comes first. It's not an armed conflict. Stop the conflict in order to forgive. What we learned from the many religious leaders we convened in Tokyo, Japan, some from Ukraine and Russia right now, was that, yes, we need restitution. We need to stop armed conflict right now. But in the midst of this process, we are having to learn to forgive. So it comes together. It is the opening of the floodgates of mercy. That is forgiveness. It isn't an either or. It isn't what comes first and what comes next. Thank you.
Yes, you are correct. These are questions that have surfaced from the audience, from the people listening, this community of listening. I think we're all happy to hear that this is the beginning and not the end of a conversation. I wonder, are there other thoughts that people would like to offer to this question, or the question about conversation between science and tradition, faith tradition?
So I was just going to speak to your question about this intersection of science and spirituality with regard to the act of forgiving and letting go. I was thinking about a ceremony that we have here twice a day, in the morning and the evenings, which is perhaps the most ancient ceremony in the Hindu tradition, which is called the yagna, or the havan, or the homa. And it's a fire ceremony. And as you place the offerings into the fire, the meaning of that is to let go from within you all of that which is keeping you from realizing the presence of God, of the truth in you. And so we offer with the offerings all of that within us, the anger, the pain, the grudges. And there's this ghee, which is a clarified butter that gets poured into the fire. And the teaching with that is, may my mind and my heart be as pure as this clarified butter being poured into the flames. And so as we do this ritual that has been done for thousands and thousands of years, at the end of every one of the mantras, it says swaha. And swaha is literally this, I am giving it to you. And it's an act of offering to the divine. The fire symbolizes the divine purifier. We're literally offering to the divine all of that that's keeping us stuck, all of those grudges, all of those pains, all of that anger. So it's a beautiful overlap of the history, the spirituality, and also the science of these rituals that has gone on for so long.
Thank you so much. I think just time for one more reflection. Ms. Matamoros, you had your digital hand up.
Yo. Sí. Yo, bueno, quisiera referirme a que
Well,
cuando hablamos de perdón,
when we
cuando
talk
una
about
persona pide
forgiven,
perdón,
when
puede hacerlo
somebody
desde
asks
su
for
corazón,
forgiveness,
pidiendo también de alguna manera
in some
enmendar
way
las cosas.
or
Es
another,
necesario que
they
se
also
sea
have to
pacífico
try
para
and
que
fix things.
sea pues una petición de perdón
So
real.
if you're asking for forgiveness,
Esta última
you have to
pregunta sí me
offer
parece que
some sort of
que es muy
restitution.
importante.
And I think that
Cuando
this is a very important
Cuando se
question.
pide perdón
When you
porque se ha
ask
causado una
for
herida,
forgiveness
es
because you
necesario
have
que
hurt
haya
somebody,
una intención detrás de querer resarcir el daño
you
que se
have
ha
to
hecho.
try
Y
and
hay una
mend
propuesta de acciones
this
concretas para
hurt.
intentar reparar el
You
daño
have to propose
que se ha hecho de alguna manera.
steps to
Y pues como decían ya algunos anteriormente, sin duda perdonar no es fácil, ¿verdad? Porque
be able
pues
to
recordamos
heal the
las
other
cosas
person.
Que nos han causado daño, que nos han
And
causado
this
heridas,
is always the case. We can always remember also the people that have caused harm, but we have to overcome this, because if there's no forgiveness, everything is worse. And it's something that festers in families, and you cannot walk the same path together if there is no forgiveness. So I think that this is very important. You have to ask for forgiveness, but you have to offer reparation so that everyone can make the effort to forgive in spite of being hurt. Because this is the moment where the transformation takes place in your heart. And this is what heals not only our heart, but our soul. You have to give more than what you ask for. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will be taking some more of your questions in about 20 minutes. Right now, I'm going to turn to a conversation with another guest, Nadia Bolz-Weber, who is a pastor and preacher and author, a faith leader on the new platforms that the 21st century has presented to us. And Nadia, do I see you?
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi.
Yeah, so here we are. Nadia and I have spoken before, but not for a long time. And you've continued to, this subject of forgiveness and also of confession kind of runs through your work. I guess I'm just kind of curious right now, as we start, to know if there's something that you just heard that you wanted to jump off of.
I really like, if there's no forgiveness, everything is worse. which was just said, which I think that's true. And I also, the whole time I was listening to our brilliant panel, it's such an honor to be part of this event. I just am sort of filled with compassion for those like myself for whom forgiveness doesn't come easy, and who have had the sting of needing forgiveness. I mean, there's a lot of talk about how hard it is to sort of offer or to live into, and it's also difficult to be somebody who is in desperate need of it as well. One of the, I had a project where I was talking to people, where this podcast where people would tell me the worst thing they'd ever done, and I'd have a compassionate conversation with them, and then I'd write a blessing for them and record it at the end. And it was extraordinarily difficult to find people to come on, because there were lots and lots of people who had stories about how other people had harmed them, and so few had stories of having harmed other people. And there was a point at which I thought, the math isn't working. I mean, who are these 3 or 4 people who have caused so much harm to everyone? And yet so few of us have stories of how we've harmed other people. And so I guess the whole time I was listening, I was sort of flipping it in my head in that way. Because even though I do talk about forgiveness and mercy and grace a lot, it's not because I have such an abundance of them that I can just share the extra with others. It's more that I'm so desperately in need of all of those things, and just so aware of like how much we just all are in desperate need of mercy when it comes down to it.
I, approaching this, kept thinking of a conversation I had years ago with Michael McCullough, who's a scientist, the clinical psychologist and researcher. He's also been very associated with, I believe, with Templeton Foundation's work. And I had a fascinating conversation. He studied forgiveness and revenge in the brain. And as I was speaking with him and hearing his insights, I was so aware of the complementary nature. I mean, it was essentially like he's taking this virtue that, as we've heard, is so deeply, deeply embedded in the great spiritual and religious traditions, kind of taking that into the laboratory and offering insight that is additive, right? That is in kinship. And so one of the things he talked about is, he said, that we essentially, as we've also discussed, are hardwired for revenge. There's an impulse in us that is organic, but he said we're also hardwired for forgiveness. But for revenge or forgiveness, there's this matter of creating the conditions in which it is more likely and more possible for one or the other to happen. And I'm just wondering, for you as a pastor, and as you've been really honest about the fact that this is not easy, it doesn't come easily. I don't know, how do you think about that question of how the conditions are created and how we, in our circumstances, can create the conditions for forgiveness to become more likely? What comes to mind for you?
Well, I've been thinking quite a lot. There's a man named David Zoll who just came out with a book called Low Anthropology, and it talks about what are our basic ideas of what is possible for human beings. What are our basic ideas of human nature, and how sometimes when we have what's like a high anthropology, meaning when we have this really high opinion of what everyone could do is possible for all human beings, it sounds positive to the ears. It sounds almost hopeful to the ears, but I think it's actually the exact opposite in real life. Meaning, when we have such incredibly high standards for how people should be behaving and what we're all capable of, we're endlessly disappointed in ourselves and other people. But when we kind of lower the bar, I know it doesn't sound like the most spiritual thing to say we all need to lower the bar, but I actually think maybe we do need to all lower our expectations of ourselves and other people, to the extent that we can go, look, when somebody makes a mistake, when somebody misspeaks, when somebody is really horrible to another person, we can access the part of us that is also capable of that and has probably also done that. And it creates a condition where we can have so much more compassion and less judgment for people, so that I think mercy is more accessible when we're allowing ourselves to admit our own fragile humanness when it comes to being horrible to ourselves and other people. I find it is a condition for compassion, which then leads to forgiveness in a way that saying like, how dare they? It doesn't. So to sort of lower our standards in terms of what we expect from ourselves and other people allows us to be so much more forgiving, I think.
Yeah, that's good. That's the inner work of this. And I really appreciated Professor Karam's image of the toxins, right? That what we're talking about, and this is what I'd like to also hear your thoughts on, what are we talking about when we talk about what's happening inside us when we don't forgive and when we do forgive? That, this idea that Professor Karam has, that, we're talking about anger and hatred and bitterness, and they are eating us alive. And, I think in my life of conversation, there's one conversation I had very early on, several decades ago, with someone who had suffered an unspeakable crime, and the person who had done this to her was in prison. And her forgiving him, as she said, never meant that it would be safe for her to be in the room with him and ask him to dinner. But what she needed to do was fill herself up with something that was good for her, rather than being filled with that hatred and that bitterness that was consuming.
Right.
And I think also that's what you're talking about. What is this spiritual work that we in some sense do as much for ourselves and by implication for the people around us? We open up room to be more loving to them, that we do for ourselves as much as we do for another.
Well, the word freedom has been brought up today, and
Yes,
to me that's just absolutely key, because when I have stayed in a place of unforgiveness towards somebody who's caused me harm, it can feel like an umbilical cord in terms of there's this thing connecting me to them, to the harm that they've done me. And that when I stay attached to it, it has this possibility of their stuff infiltrating my heart. I really am in danger of becoming more like them, in a sense. That toxicity is connected to me because I haven't snapped that cord yet. And like it was said, if we don't forgive, we're stuck in the past. And I want freedom. I'm in all of this for freedom. And, Annie Lamott said, like, she said, I think life is forgiveness school. Like, I think it's the whole deal. I wish the whole deal was something else. I wish the whole thing about life spiritually was truly just feathering my nest with more and more virtues, just becoming a much better person all the time. And I think the whole deal is forgiveness. It is the key to that freedom and that liberation that I want to live into. And yet my ego gets in the way all the time, saying what I'm due, because it can feel, if I've been harmed, and then someone says, you have to forgive, it feels like almost more victimization to say, not only have I taken in this harm, but now I'm expected to name it something else. But I don't think that's true. I don't think forgiveness means that we are calling a harm inert, or that we're naming it as being something other than bad. It's to say, it's not saying like what you did is okay, like someone said. It's saying it's so not okay, I refuse to be connected to it anymore. It's yours. It never had my name on it. So I'm not gonna continually metabolize it,
Mm-hmm. something else that this Michael McCullough, the scientist, said to me is it's worth us pondering that we forgive the people closest to us 100 times a day without calling it that, without needing to name it as a noble virtue, right? He said, like, I think one of his children had broken his nose accidentally shortly before we spoke, and he said, but I don't call that forgiveness. I think that's important also, that we perhaps interrogate what we've just been discussing, what we're really talking about when we talk about forgiveness, and how the good in it that we have experienced, and also the fact that we do know how to do this in our ordinary lives, and perhaps we can become reflective about that, again, about in our lives what those conditions are and how we cultivate them a little bit more widely.
That's beautiful. I know there's this, Jesus said this super annoying thing where, like, there was this disciple who came to him and said, Jesus, how many times should I forgive a brother who harms me? And he thought he was being such a really good boy by saying, do you think it's 7? Like, should I forgive him 7 times? And Jesus says, no, like 7 times 70. And you could just feel the guy who asked the question go, oh gosh. But I don't think it's the thing where we allow ourselves to be victimized 7 times 70 and then just forgive. I think it's the fact that, like you said, it's a daily thing, maybe several times a day. It's like if there's somebody that I seek, like somebody had said, the first is decisional forgiveness. If I've had that decision to forgive, that it's going to take a while. Like, it might take many days. It might take 7 times 70 days to get to the point where I'm not constantly having to do it over and over and over again. And I love the idea that, yeah, we forgive people we that are closest to us, for eating the banana we were saving for breakfast, like, just to keep peace, we do know how to do it. It's just, my ego wants to hold on to what it feels like it's due.
Yes, I also recall sitting with the extraordinary late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and him talking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's work and how miraculous that was to participate in, and also noting that, interestingly, as complex as it is, as we've been discussing, forgiveness can happen in an instant, right? Like, again, creating those conditions. And yet that's not the full work of reconciliation, right? Which can take the rest of a lifetime or generations.
That's right. And I think sometimes that can be a glitch. So often I've been interviewing people about forgiveness over the past year and a half. And one of the sort of bumps in the road often is saying, like, I have a narrative, I have a story about what you did and what it meant and why you did it and how it affected me. And in order for us to be in relationship, I need you to tell the exact same story in the same way. And the likelihood of 2 people telling the same story in the same way is very small, and if that is what we're hung up on, sometimes it's like, how much can we forgive the story we're telling about the harm that was done to us? How much can we let go of that? Can we have freedom from the story we're telling ourselves about it? That sometimes is a huge part of the freedom for me, is to just let go of the narrative,
Okay. Again, so much to keep pondering. We are now going to open up again for questions in this room of people who are with us. And in a few minutes, I also would like to invite the panelists to join in, reflecting on the questions that are being asked, or what Nadia's been offering these last few minutes. So I am just going to catch up with these questions that are coming in. Here's a question, a phrase I hear a lot. This is from an audience member. in the world is forgive yourself, especially among people who are in deep need of forgiveness and skew to the self-critical side of things. Do you think it's actually possible for us to forgive ourselves, or is it an interaction that requires more than one entity? For example, God, or the person we've been harmed by.
Yeah, forgiving ourselves is the advanced course. But I also think it's a critical piece. I've been wondering recently, there's so many places to get lots of affirmations right now. There's a lot of influencers on Instagram, a lot of lifestyle influencers who can just offer us so many pep talks and so many sort of, affirmations. And I've wondered, what is it that keeps these from actually settling into us, right? Why do we keep needing to hear these things? We're in desperate need. And I think the thing that blocks it is that we haven't sort of forgiven ourselves. We haven't sort of taken out the trash when it comes to our own selves. And so one of the things I keep hearing, for instance, are people who had to parent young children during the pandemic who were not sort of wired to be homeschoolers, right? Here we all of a sudden had little kids at home all day long. And what happened? We were not the best version of ourselves at every moment. When we were having to homeschool kids, we never signed up to do that. And so I think people hold on to these snippets in their minds of this image of when I was not at my best self. And again, I think having a little bit lower standards, like the very best thing we can do is just lower our standards, is to go, that is the most human thing in the world. Nobody was the best version of themselves while they were stuck in a small home having to homeschool kids on little laptops. And to go, it's absolutely human. And there was a meditation teacher that I was listening to a couple years ago who says that when he's really berating himself, really having a go at himself, he'll put his hand on his heart and he'll just say, "It's okay, little brother." Like, actually speak to himself like he's his own little brother. And to have that level of compassion for himself, it feels, I don't want to have to forgive myself. I would so much rather always be the best version of myself. And yet when I sort of admit that's not possible for any human being on the planet, it allows me to relax into the truth of that in a place of mercy a little bit, even for myself.
This is from a question from the Honorable Ela Gandhi. If we believe that it is likely that the person did not realize the wrong he or she has done, then should we not say that it is important to point out to the person that what has been done is wrong, rather than simply forgiving? And I think in a few minutes, I'd love for perhaps another panelist to contribute to this. But Nadia, how does that?
Yeah, I think it's very popular right now to say that people's motives don't matter, that like what their intention was doesn't matter, only the harm that was caused matters. And I understand where that comes from. However, I think it allows for a little more compassion for humanity if we say somebody's intention does not impact the amount of harm that what they did had. That's very different, because then we can allow for their humanity as well. So I know for myself, I have many times caused harm to people and not intended it or known it had happened. And I know that I am much more open to receiving the truth of it if I feel like they're doing it from a place of compassion towards me instead of judgment. So again, to me, compassion is a huge, it's almost pedagogical. Like I feel more teachable when it comes to how I might have hurt someone if the person who is giving me that message is doing it in a place of compassion. It feels like the magic element to me.
So Grandfather Rankin, I've seen your digital hand up, and I think what I'd like to do is open this up to our esteemed panelists, perhaps responding to some of these questions that have come in from the audience. but also just how you might offer your perspective, add to this conversation that has been building. And please just, let's pretend like we're in a room, just speak up. I won't call on people.
Thank you very much. We've been talking about lots of things, and I'm trying to follow the conversation. And trying to see how this applies to my situation. So for me, I need to return to the forest. We don't say the river, but we look at all of nature. Also, the lake we call Sagaigan, that means love, love, the lake of love. And for 9 months, we were in water, and so this water helps us to get rid of our problems. And for me, we need to stay in our internal garden. A couple of examples. How is your garden? And in the morning, I take a glass of water, and I am thankful for earth, for water, and thankful for the whole universe. And for me, that helps me to have this gratitude to get rid of bad thoughts, the love that I have for others, and truth, the acceptance. And that gives me the strength to be able to respond properly. So that gives me the strength. When I see that my grandparents lost their territory, lost their land, I get on my knees and I say, I can't go into the past, and I need the Spirit to help to find internal peace before I deal with others. And that gives me a freedom of my spirit. I never say a negative word. I have lived negativity, and I have had that in my center, in my being. I want to get rid of negativity. I like to dance. I like to dance and to sing. And these are tools also that help us. We are clowns on the earth. We're people, but we're like clowns. We have a face on us, and we try to be something to get rid of our pain by humor. And so we use humor a lot. To deal with the past. Every morning when I get up, I look at the sun, I think of the benedictions, the things that I have to praise for, as my ancestors greeted the sun in the morning. And before I can relate to people, I need to have peace in myself. I need to be present with the Spirit. And I don't ever want to define myself as a victim of a certain situation. That thought is wrong. I am not a victim. Rather, for life, I am seeking healing. Do I have complete healing? Not yet. I still have wounds. I still have pain. and I will live with those scars, even if somebody has done evil to a child. My scars are there, but that person needs to help me, and I need to listen to that person. I had an experience in my past for 7 years, and now it's over, and I move on, and I let those barriers be overcome. We always have things to repair, to heal. We are here. We are all together. We are brothers and sisters. And what we have, the color on our skin is our pride. But what is inside is the blood, all of us, the same red blood. There's no difference. So we who had been told that we were savages, that we were this and that we were that, we need to repair and fix all that. I'm very proud of who I am today. I'm very proud. When I greet people, I'm not different from others. We are all the same. I am here to listen and to listen to others and to share my experience, to share my story. I know that my story is very heavy, but I need to find balance in that. I tell myself, yes, that can touch me very deeply when I find children who have suffered. But I don't want to harm people. It's important to speak, but let things go.
Thank you.
And let problems go. I try to understand what have happened to children for many years, but I tell myself, I was there, and now I'm here. I'm at the exterior when I see children in another way. I see them not buried, but I see them returned to the forest. And when I go in the forest, I think of those children, and there's energy in the forest, and that is where I stay, and I find healing. And I go and I thank my parents. I thank the psychologists and all who have helped me and helped me to find healing. But the person that needs the most healing is myself. And when I am with myself, I forgive myself. And I cannot go to the past. The past is over. I go forward.
Thank you so much.
And I move forward.
Yeah.
And I love my life today. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much for that illustration of how this is deep. I mean, dancing and laughing are detoxification, right? But what you've lived is how that moves into flourishing and healing. Other comments on where we've come to in this conversation? Just speak up.
I wanted just to respond to something that Nadia had been speaking about, and then it's arisen in various ways from the others as well, is this idea of story. When Nadia was talking about letting go of the story and the importance of the story, that to me has always felt really critical, that there's the act of forgiveness, which we have to do. We forgive, we let go. And yet, what I found in my own life was that I was burdened and suffering not only from anger and pain, but from this identification as the one who had been abused, the one who had been abandoned, the one who struggled with this, the one who struggled with that. And that letting go of that identification was as critical as letting go of the anger and the pain. And one of the most powerful ways for me of realizing that is this, again, going back to the science and the spirituality, is the idea that if that which happened to you happened more than 7 or 8 years ago, there isn't actually a cell in your body today to which that happened. So I didn't have a part of my body that I could show and say, this was abused. But what we do is we carry that in the story in our minds. And that's what keeps us really so stuck. And so on both a personal level, in terms of my own transformation, but also even more than that, in terms of the ministering and the counseling that I do, one of the most critical pieces is helping people figure out, who would you be if you weren't the victim of this? If you weren't the victim of that, who else would you be? What is the identity? And peeling back those layers of drama into a place that the Hindus refer to as everythingness, the Buddhists refer to as nothingness, but it's that same experience of the soul and infinite. So that was something that had really touched me in terms of the way that I'm working with forgiveness personally and in ministry.
Thank you. I think as we wind down, I'd like Dr. Chitou and then Rabbi Jacobs, please, to offer us your wisdom.
Merci beaucoup, puisque vous allez constater que je suis le seul africain parmi vous, et vous devrez d'abord.
So as you can see, I am the only African here. And of course, you can see that in Africa, we have a lot of conflicts.
These conflicts. Quelqu'un doit se demander comment est-ce que nous gérons ces conflits. Vous entendez parler d'une guerre ici, d'une guerre de l'autre côté, et c'est souvent c'est de même tribu, mais malgré cela,
and it's the same tribe,
à se réconcilier. On arrive
and we
après
reconcile.
de
And
problèmes,
afterwards,
on arrive à se réconcilier, à
when we
revenir
have reconciled,
à vivre ensemble comme si
we
rien n'était.
learn to live together,
Pourquoi? Parce que on a compris
right?
maintenant
Because
que
we
la vengeance
understood
et
that vengeance
ne cesse que d'augmenter les problèmes.
just continues the problem. It just exacerbates the problem. Hate is a chains us to our problems. We now we understand that vengeance or retribution or looking to get vengeance is a way that brings us pain and sadness in our life, because every time that you want restitution, you can't continue to live together. If I tell you, in Islam, when you have stolen or taken something, even somebody takes something, you need retribution. It's natural to want retribution. But if it's a problem from the past and you want to keep returning to that past problem, it's in the past. And that's where our problem is, where we can't move forward. Our nature is to always think of the future and to have hope and think of the future. When we want a future that's better, then we cannot keep returning to the pain of the past. But we need to move forward, and forgiveness is the way that we move forward. And our problems in Africa are huge. And if I count all that has happened to us in our society, I think we would not have enough time to even list them all. We wouldn't have other opportunities for other people to to speak. But here in Africa, we have many problems.
Thank you so much. I feel like this very powerful idea that forgiveness orients us towards the future, and in some sense makes a transformed future possible is so critical. We really must end. Rabbi Jacobs, do you have some final words? And then
So first of all, so grateful for all the wisdom and agitation that's been shared. I just would conclude that there's so many, particularly in the questions that have been posed, there are two spiritual practices. One is the restorative practice. It's the earning and the repairing of forgiveness. That's the deeper, harder work personally, and it's the deeper, harder work in community. And then there's the practice of forgiveness. And sometimes the two intersect and sometimes they don't. And I just think of, a sermon I gave about letting go of grievances and forgiving. And a woman came to me afterwards and said, I was so offended by that sermon. How dare you call for me to forgive this person who tormented and just abused and caused the deepest harm? How in the world could you ask me to do that? And I said, it wasn't for the transgressor. It was for you, that you could be liberated from that pain. The last thought is the great spiritual master who went to Germany after World War II, a survivor of the Holocaust. And he gave a concert, and people said, how do you come back to Germany after the trauma that you experienced? He said, if I had two hearts, I'd keep one just to hate, and it would be 24/7 busy. And I could have another heart to forgive. He said, but I have one, and I'm not going to waste it in the hatefulness and the grievance and the pain. So it's not a simple conclusion, but so much for us to each of us wrestle with, and our communities to wrestle. And if we could wrestle with each other's traditions and traumas, I think we could put many of the pieces of this broken world together.
I think those are incredible words to end on. Also with the understanding we've established that this is something that each of us individually and our communities and our disciplines, that this is the calling of a lifetime. And so I want to say what an honor it's been for me to be part of this today, and thank all of the panelists and the moderators. I do want to point you towards our wonderful host organizations. TempletonWorldCharity.org and Religions for Peace is at rfp.org. There's also a collection of research and resources at discoverforgiveness.org, and also at rfp.org. You'll find that kind of repository. I'd like to thank you. I wonder if Andrew and Azza would just like to offer your own words of thanks and benediction.
I'll take the liberty of going first, and I want to thank you, Krista and Nadia, and every single faith leader for the remarkable wisdom shared. Clearly a conversation that needs to go on, to go deeper, to be informed by so many more differences and diversity that exists in the science that informs the faith and the faith that informs the science. Thank you very much indeed for the wisdom, the inspiration, the graciousness of soul and character, for the forgiveness of one another. Thank you very much to Dr. Andrew and his team at Templeton, who have done an absolutely remarkable job, and deep gratitude for the team at Religions for Peace, who have done also a wonderful job to be here, and for all of those who made it possible for us to understand one another. Number one step in being able to love. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Karam. And I'm just filled with so much humility and awe with the stories that have been shared today. We've heard about forgiveness as returning home, as a gift, a liberation. I think about it as a kind of miracle that comes from outside of us. And thank you for sharing all of your stories today. And we are so grateful for you and continuing the conversation, which is, as Nadia said, the whole game of life. So thank you all, and best wishes.